Welcome to meeting number 108 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Pursuant to the order of reference referred to the committee on Wednesday, December 13th, 2023, the committee resumes its study of Bill S-210, an act to restrict young persons' online access to sexually explicit material. Before we begin, I would like to ask all members and other in-person participants to consult the cards on the table for guidance to prevent auto feedback incidents. Please take note of the following preventative measures in place to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Only use a black approved earpiece. The former gray earpieces must no longer be used. Keep your earpiece away from all microphones at all times. When you're not using your earpiece, place it face down on the sticker placed on the table for this purpose. Thank you all for your consideration.
Point of order, Chair.
Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Okay. So first, we have some bills to pay. So the clerk has distributed on Monday.
Chair, can I raise a point of order?
Mr. Dennis, on a point of order.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I know there's been some disagreement about aspects of the agenda over the last few meetings, but there have been some discussions among the parties. And we may have an agreement, we may not, but I want to propose and see if there's unanimous consent for that and see where we're at. So I propose that there be unanimous consent for the following. That the draft report on the Bernardo prison transfer be immediately distributed, that the report be considered at the next meeting of the committee, that the chair seek additional resources in the week of June 3rd for the study of S-210, and that the Minister of Public Safety be invited to appear for 2 hours in the week of June 10th, with 1 hour dedicated to auto theft and 1 hour dedicated to the main estimates, and that the Minister of Transport be invited to appear separately for 1 hour on auto theft. I think that has been distributed, and I'm hoping there might be agreement on it.
Is there unanimous consent? I see no unanimous consent. So back to business. So the clerk has
Chair, just another point of order. I wonder if I could propose, is it possible to have a 5-minute suspension for discussion on that?
Why don't we get through a little bit of this and then we'll go back to, we'll maybe raise another point of order to see if we can do that.
Okay.
So the clerk has distributed on Monday, May 6th and May 24th a draft budget on S-210 in the amount of $15,000. Does the committee wish to adopt the budget? Can I have a show of hands? All in favor, so that passes. Similarly, I note that the deadline to report Bill S-210 to the House is Friday, June 7th. I'm asking, is it the will of the committee to request an extension of 30 sitting days for the consideration of Bill S-210 and that the chair present a report to the House?
No, there isn't,
Chair.
Chair.
Show of hands on this, please.
No. No, there isn't,
All
Chair.
in favor?
Chair, it's not a vote. You can't call a vote. If you're removing the motion, I'd like to speak to it.
The chair is entitled to seek guidance from the committee whenever
you cannot end debate on it, and this will be an issue in the House if you do, Chair. You can't end debate on it. If this is a matter to be debated, then I'd like to debate it. You cannot arbitrarily cut off speakers or limit debate on a matter before the committee. That's a clear violation of the standing orders, and it is appealable to the House. So if you'd like to move that an extension be requested, then I would like to speak on that matter.
Well,
and I will be heard.
Such a motion. I'm asking guidance from the committee.
Not agreement of the committee. There are two ways the committees come to decisions, either by agreement or by a motion. If there is a motion before this committee, then I wish to speak to it. You cannot get agreement of the committee when members dissent unless debate ends. So that is how the rules work.
The decision of the chair is to seek advice of the committee on this matter. Do you wish to challenge the chair?
Chair, I wish to speak on the motion before the committee. And you need to respect the rules. This is not allowed. and I will speak to the motion. If you're putting a motion on the floor on an extension, I wish to speak to the motion. Now, the committee has before it a number
Point
of
of order,
matters to
Mr. Chair.
consider, and those
On-
matters.
Mr. Numa, have it on point of order.
I don't believe there was an actual motion on the floor, so there should be no debate.
There is no actual motion on the
There
floor.
is not agreement of the committee.
Excuse me, please don't interrupt. I've asked the committee
No.
for advice, for guidance. on
Point of order,
matters
Chair.
Before the committee.
There is not agreement of the committee to proceed in this fashion. The committee does not agree. You cannot demand agreement without allowing people to speak on it. And if you let the clerk speak, he will confirm exactly what I'm saying. The chair has to respect the rules.
The chair has decided to ask the committee for guidance.
The chair
That
must
is
respect the
decision of
rules.
the chair.
Is
If
there a
you
motion
wish-
on the floor?
If you wish to challenge the chair on this matter,
Chair.
please do so.
Is there a motion on the floor?
There is no motion on the floor.
Then there is no agreement. There,
My-
Chair, you will respect the rules.
Back it up from the mic, please.
You
Back
need
from the mic.
to respect the rules, Chair.
So the decision of the chair is to seek advice of the committee.
Chair, is there a motion before the committee or not?
Mr. Jennings, the chair has the floor. You do not. The chair is asking the committee for advice on a matter that is of time urgency.
Not agree. The committee does not agree.
You do not speak for the committee. I will ask the
Sir,
committee if you wish to challenge.
you cannot
Do not
presume the
interrupt.
agreement of the committee without a motion. And I'm not going to back down on defending the rules or the prerogatives of this committee. I know the rules better than you do, Chair, and ask the clerk. Get the clerk's opinion on this. Because the clerk knows that I'm right. The speaker will know that I'm right. And for you to think that just because you sit in that chair, you can show flagrant disregard for the rules and the way they protect the privileges of members is disgraceful. So if you want to put a motion before the committee, then we can have a motion
Point
and we
of
can debate
order.
it.
Point of
And
order, Chair.
if you
I don't
are not
know
putting
if
before a
it's-
motion,
Miss-
then you have no
Seems
agreement
to
of the
me
committee.
that in
Ms.
this
Hebner, on point of
instance,
order.
the point of orders are being used to talk over the chair. And Mr. Jennings keeps taking control of the chair from you. Control of the floor from you, Chair. I'm finding it very difficult to follow. He keeps talking over you. Does he know? Is that part of the rules of the House? Can you talk over the chair? Can you just take, if you want to bully your point across, do you just take the floor? Is that how it works around here? But I'm finding this very difficult to follow, Chair, because you keep getting talked over.
Thank you very much. Point of order.
The committee does not agree.
Mr. Jennings, I have the floor. So in exact like manner as I just achieved approval of the committee to approve the budget, I'm asking for the committee.
No, Chair, there was unanimous agreement on the budget.
Point of order,
The
Mr.
committee
Chair.
agreed unanimously on the budget.
They may have voted unanimous, but I did not ask for unanimous consent.
The committee
Mr.
agreed
Newman,
unanimously on the
point of order.
budget.
It is noted in Boston Gagnon that any efforts to undermine or disrespect the authority of the chair can be considered disorder and misconduct. At this stage, Mr. Jennings' language in respect of his conduct towards you and the function of this committee, without actually having given you the opportunity to finish what you were saying, would appear to now be sitting somewhere in that zone.
On that point, Chair. On that point.
Okay, we'll suspend for a couple minutes. You
Okay.
can discuss your other matter, but meanwhile, the chair is,
There is not agreement.
you do not agree. You do
No,
not speak for
the committee does not agree.
You do not agree.
The committee does not agree.
We will
There is
suspend
no
for 5
agreement of the
minutes.
committee.
5 minutes.
You cannot do this.
back to order, I hope. So there has been a lot of serious negotiation in the back room. Mr. Jennings, did you wish to speak to that point?
Yeah, Chair. Just I think there's an agreement that we distribute the draft Bernardo report, that an auto theft report be drafted and distributed, that investigation of Bill C-70 begin on Thursday, and that we proceed with the hearings as scheduled today. Is that?
Do we have unanimous agreement?
Okay, great.
There's a question here by the clerk about the auto theft report. We haven't given instructions yet to the analysts.
Analysts are very wise and capable people, and
Well, that is true. That is an absolute. So let us leave it at the point where they will go forward as best they can, and because they teach us anyway. That being the case, we have unanimous consent for that agreement. Are you clear, Mr. Clerk, on what that is?
I do.
Okay. Very well. Let us get back to S210. Let me first acknowledge that Mr. Jennings was not wrong before. I hate to say that, but it's true.
Chair, I want to acknowledge that was very gracious of you, and I want to compliment you for saying so,
thank
because
you.
I think that is, no, I want to say it's a credit to your character to acknowledge that with the
Well,
rules. I appreciate it.
we're going to start hiring you for procedural advice. So, Mr. Nur Mohammed, please.
I would just, it's not a point, I just want to say, like, we actually all managed to do this together, and it was I think it was a really important signal that when we have a commitment to doing something together and having common purpose, we can actually get stuff done. So I just wanted to thank my former colleagues from this committee, whom I miss dearly, for allowing us to do it. We're all working together.
There you go.
We're all going to Heritage now.
And actually, this process is not particularly unusual for this place at this time of year, nor is the sudden rapprochement towards the end. So, to our witnesses, thank you for waiting. So, we'll continue with your remarks now, followed by questions. You were slated for a full hour. We have resources to give you that full hour. Mr. Dufresne is out there with Miss Lily Lara Ives, right? And I've advised them that when we start, we will bring them in an hour later. So we will have that full panel as well. So that being the case, I would like now to welcome our witness, who is the sponsor of Bill S-210 in the Senate. And I should note that Senator Deschênes has been shepherding this bill through the various processes since 2020. And I think she's launched it like 4 times. Anyway, so we're glad to at last have you able to speak. And so we have the Honorable Julie Milville-Deschênes, Senator. We have also, as an individual, Jérôme Lucier, Director of Parliamentary Affairs for the office of Senator Milville-Deschênes. And I now invite the Senator to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Donc, je vous remercie de
Thank you for inviting me to present Bill S-210. I'll be happy to answer your questions in French, but I'll be starting in English because most of the criticisms were done mostly in English. So to answer your question, there have been 2 studies in committee because of elections. We heard 24 witnesses. There were 28 briefs. So this bill has been well studied at the Senate.
210 seeks to apply to online porn the rules that normally apply offline. The bill does 3 things. First, it requires websites that offer porn to verify the age of users before they can access that content. Second, it sets up an enforcement mechanism that can result in non-complying websites getting blocked in Canada. And third, it provides that acceptable age verification methods will be decided in regulation to be adopted after consultation and with input from experts. The bill specifies that any approved method must be reliable, collect information solely for age verification purposes, destroy any personal information once the verification is done, and comply with best practices. Polls indicate that close to 80% of Canadians support age verification to access porn online. But Bill S210 has been attacked, and I want to correct some misrepresentation. It has been said no country has done this. This is false. Germany, France, the UK, the European Union, and several US states have passed laws and regulation to impose age verification to access porn. Spain is expected to launch a pilot project soon, and Australia, which has paused this work, announced last week that it will move ahead. It has been painted as a partisan or ideological bill to control sexuality. False. Age verification is supported by the socialist government of Spain and the conservative government in the UK. In California, an age verification bill was recently approved unanimously by 2 legislative committees. This is not partisan legislation. It has been called an attack on free expression. False again. Bill S210 would not affect the availability of porn for adults. It would simply prevent children from accessing it. In Europe, porn sites have challenged age verification laws, and they have failed at every stage. In the US, a country known for its robust speech protection, porn sites have challenged the laws, and they have failed all the way to the Supreme Court. It has been said that age verification would mean submitting personal identification to porn site. False again. In Europe and elsewhere, age verification is typically done by third-party companies using methods that transmit no personal information to porn sites. These are among the best practices we would expect in Canada as well. It has been said that this bill would block all forms of nudity. False. The bill uses the standard definition of pornography found in the criminal code. The bill also provides for usual exception for art, science, and education. It has been said that this bill would impose age verification to all websites. False. Bill S210 only requires age verification to access porn content. If a website contains porns and non-porn content, age verification is only required to access porn content. It has been said that there's no way to check someone's age without compromising privacy. False. France is developing a double anonymous method. The UK regulator has recommended age estimation approaches that collect no information. Australia has explained its recent decision to move ahead with age verification by saying that the technology it has looked at only a year ago has already improved. Finally, it has been said that age verification is useless because kids will find ways around it. This is once again false. Actual studies show that only a small number of children know how to evade these restrictions. It's possible that some older teenagers and adults will use VPNs to bypass age verification, but it's highly unlikely that large numbers of 8, 10, and 12 years old will do so. So I will be happy to take questions, but please, please, don't let Canada be the last place on earth where pornographers are more protected than children.
11 seconds over. Pretty good. We'll let it go. We go now to questions with Mr. Jennis. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to go quite quickly through a series of questions. I'd be grateful if you could be as short as possible, even providing a yes or no where appropriate. You said in the Senate study, 24 witnesses, 28 briefs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
in two committees because we had to do it twice. The bill
Okay.
passed twice, the Senate.
Okay. And after those hearings, the bill was passed unanimously and unopposed by all senators. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Does Bill S-210 create or call for the creation of a digital ID?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Would it be possible to use the provisions of this bill to create a digital ID?
No.
Okay.
There's zero mention of digital ID in this bill.
Thank you. Bill S-210 requires that some age verification method be used, but it does not prescribe the method. So is that correct, and why not explicitly define the age verification method in statute?
Well, this is how we write proper legislation. Age verification are technical by nature, and we have said in the bill, and it's very clear at Article 11, that precautions have to be taken, best practice has to be used, privacy has to be respected. But to choose age verification method in the bill would be a grave error because those techniques change. And we want in the regulation, the specialists, the experts, and the government to choose the best age verification method at the time they will act on it.
As technology evolves. Okay, so are there age verification methods that do not involve identity verification?
Yes. If I take here, if I quote from the Ofcom, which is the regulatory agency in Britain, one of them, they say kinds of age insurance that could be highly effective because they're at the stage of putting in regulation. They have passed a whole bill about that. And they mention face age estimation, which is, you've heard about age estimation. It works by analyzing the feature of a user face to estimate their age, but there's no collection at all of identity. It's done through estimation plus or minus 2 years. So that's
Okay.
one of them. There are obviously others.
And there are others besides the face method that would not involve looking at face, but also still provide age estimation without identity.
Absolutely.
Okay. Could the verification process be done by a third party, such that a person's identity could never be linked with their pornography use habits, even if there was a data breach?
Well, if you look at our bill, Article 11 say best practices have to be followed, and obviously, third-party verification is one of the best practices. This is what Germany, France, and the UK are proposing or have implemented already. And the idea, obviously, is not to give any personal data to either porn sites or platforms on the web.
Right, and just to clarify, that separates the verification from the
Yes,
site.
and
You get confirmation of age, and then you take that somewhere else.
Well, it's called, in fact, double anonymity.
Yeah.
Because on one side, the third party, the third party does the verification with all the best practices and is submitted to all the privacy law, and it just sends to the porn sites a token, and the only question is this customer 18 years old and more?
Okay.
So the porn site never knows who is coming in the porn site.
Excellent. Would the Privacy Act still apply, and does this bill amend or weaken in any way the protections associated with the Privacy Act?
It applies fully.
Thank you. Would this bill apply to educational materials, artwork involving nudity, or other depictions of the human body that are not pornographic in nature?
No. As I said earlier in Article 6, there's an exception for educational, scientific, and artistic material. So all three are excluded from any age verification.
Thank you. In the absence of meaningful age verification, what is the average age today at which children in Canada are accessing pornography?
So this is one of the worrisome figures. The average age varies according to the studies between 11 and 13 years old, but you should know that the first encounter with porn, 50% of the 13-year-old had their first encounter with porn, 27% of the 11-year-old had it, and 10% of 9-year-old have already watched or been in contact with porn. So we're talking here about huge figures.
Senator, that is horrifying to me. Those are absolutely horrifying numbers. Do you believe that showing children sexually explicit pictures or videos is a form of child abuse?
I do, and because the Canadian Centre for Child Protection has an extremely good reputation in Canada, I will quote them, some of what they're saying about the fact that all children have access without any kind of research on their age. They have access to porn. So here is what the center says. So among the harms to children exposed to sexually explicit material, you have difficulty forming a healthy relationship, harmful sexual beliefs and behaviors, a normalization of sexual harm. They don't see, because porn is there, it's normalized. The porn that you see that can contain violence and degrading act is normal for them. So obviously they're more susceptible to be armed by a pornographer.
Thank you, Mr. Janice. We go now to Mr. Nur Mohammed. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you so much, and it's nice to finally be able to get to this place where we can have a good conversation about this bill. Senator, I think we all agree that what you are trying to accomplish is very important, and I think that there are many means by which to do that. And I would submit that Bill C-63 takes into consideration many of the issues that you seek to solve for. One of the concerns that I did want to hear from you on is the whole issue of online privacy. And I'm curious if you could briefly explain what the impact this bill might have on online privacy for Canadians, and whether or not there would be any concerns in respect of the privacy of online users.
Well, first of all, I have to say that Bill 63, Bill 63 doesn't talk about age verification. There's nothing in this bill about age verification. This is not, the word is not even used, and there's very little on pornography. What Bill 63 says is it talks about a very vague concept, which is, age-appropriate design. So they're saying that there should be age-appropriate design. Well, I'm sorry, but age-appropriate design is not age verification. It could be at some point if a committee decides, but it's not in the bill. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. About privacy, we have laws in Canada.
Sorry, if I could though, I mean, I think one of the concerns on this is the whole issue of personal information, right? So if you, okay, all right.
So first of all, on this question, obviously we have privacy laws in Canada. Why would suddenly those privacy laws would not apply to any company doing third-party verification? It's a nonsense. So I will quote some people that are more experts than me on that, which is the Age Verification Providers Association, who says, privacy-preserving age verification technology is already used at scale. It is highly effective, and our members have already completed over 1 billion age checks. Age verification can be designed to completely protect the identity of the user.
So on that basis, so who would design the technology you're proposing, or what technology are you proposing that be used? Would it be a private sector technology or government?
No, it would not be a government technology.
So the private sector would would be the entity
well,
that.
First
that
of all,
took, let me finish the question.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is the private sector would have access to individual Canadians' data. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm suggesting that all of those questions will be resolved in the regulations. But what I'm saying to you is what we have in this bill is in Article 11, we have 5 principles that will assure that privacy will be respected. I will read the main one to you, which is maintains user, so, age verification method, the method that will be chosen maintains user privacy and protects user personal information.
But on this point, though, one of the concerns that people have raised is that 11.2 permits the use of what some would argue are inherently unsafe age verification methods by internet services, whether it's uploading of data, scanning social media activity. How do we assure Canadians that they will not be subjected to having to turn all this information over in order for this sort of age verification to take place? I think one of the things that I'm just trying to make sure is that we achieve the goal.
I'm not following you on 11.2. What are you saying here?
So under 11.2, would it not permit, I mean, as I read it, and it could be my read of it, it would permit the use of any number of options in terms of age verification.
But the options would have to follow those rules because they're in the bill. So no method that doesn't respect privacy could be chosen in regulation because regulation, as you know, have to follow the principles that are in the bill.
So who would own the? I guess let me try and simplify this.
So
in order for someone's age to be verified, who would control, hold, protect, and safeguard the data that is shared?
So the way it is done in other countries, for example, Germany, is a system of accreditation. Some companies who are specialists in this age verification can apply, and for them to be accredited to do age verification on Canadians, they would need an accreditation.
So in that regard, though, I mean, you've seen age restriction technologies and policies challenged in courts and jurisdictions in the U.S. and the U.K. How do we make sure that this doesn't end up with a challenge in the courts?
Well, up to now, in the U.S., they have lost the porn companies who have sued have lost. Now it's said in the U.S., which is really very strong in terms of freedom of expression. There's already a court decision that says that those laws are not unconstitutional. So that's really interesting because years ago it was the contrary, but now the problem is so prevalent of young people watching porn, children, that the courts have obviously changed their idea on it. And I would say
what I want to be clear on is that there's nobody here saying that let's give children unfettered access to porn. So let that not be the message that you're hearing. What I am trying to do is to make sure that whatever we do does not end up being challenged successfully in the courts. So, for example, you've talked a little bit about the U.S. The U.K., there's been a series of challenges. Other jurisdictions have seen challenges around this. And in Canada, where we have an ongoing debate in respect of people's privacy, how do we ensure that members, particularly of the LGBTQ2S plus community and others, do not find themselves on the wrong end of the wrong arm of the law without, to be clear, this is not about saying, let us give unfettered access to pornography to children. So let that not be the takeaway. My question is, how do we handle this in a way that protects young people, that provides people the assurance that what is being done here falls within the grounds of Canada's privacy laws, and that we're doing this in a manner consistent with the law?
Okay, so
I'll let the senator answer, and then we'll go to Madame
So I will just, on the question of lawsuit, in France, Germany, all the lawsuits have been lost by the porn companies. So we are not facing at this point a great challenge. On your second question, this bill goals is to protect all children, all minors, whatever their, from porn. What you're saying here is that particular members of the LGBTQ could be could be particularly vulnerable to the privacy issue. I haven't seen any study on that. We're seeing here, we are saying privacy will be respected. We have, on betting, on all kind of other questions, we are giving some of our identity to a lot of people. Why would here it'd be different, and why would this community be targeted? I'm sorry, I don't get it. In Canada, with the laws we have, what makes you think their name would come
Merci,
out?
Madame. On y va maintenant à Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud, you have the floor now. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Madam Senator, for coming. I was looking forward to hear you talk about this very important bill, S210, an act to restrict young persons' online access to sexually explicit material and also protecting young people from educating themselves on online pornography. I like the way you explained it at the beginning by saying that we are trying to do online what we're doing offline. So it was a lot simpler when children could not buy a review with pornographic material on it. Right now, it's a lot more complicated with all we have available online. On the contrary, there's no unanimity on this bill. As you have observed, the government voted against and had it sent here for it to be studied in committee. It's thanks to the vote of the other opposition parties that we're here today and that we are studying this bill, which is well designed. I read the bill. It's well done. I think it's a good bill. The Bloc Québécois is in favor of the bill, but it's not easy to work with age verification. We have read what is happening in other countries. You mentioned Germany, the UK, France, and some states in the United States, Spain and Australia. What I am reading from what is happening in this country is that sometimes the law was never applied, pilot projects have been planned. We do not necessarily have any indication as to what the countries are doing concretely. What example should Canada copy? So I'd like to hear you tell us more about the question you mentioned before. Why allow it to be done through regulation instead of having it enshrined in law directly? Would you like the government to act through regulation? Are you not afraid that it should be done by regulation, knowing very well that this government does not like this bill? Answer. Let me start with the question regarding the countries. Germany has been doing age verification for years and years now through regulation. We received a testimony at the Senate. There has never been any information released. There are different methods that are used by companies and third parties that are accredited. So this is a system that works. Of course, they started applying regulations before Pornhub came, but international platforms are refusing to comply. In the case of Great Britain, a first bill didn't work, a second was adopted, and the regulations are underway. I know that that was one of the models that was considered by the government of Canada. The British law took years for it to be implemented. It's excellent. It mentions pornography. It says that we must attack pornographic websites and so on because children are looking at a lot of porn on Twitter, even than on pornographic sites. So social media has to be considered. Yes, some countries are doing it. You are right. But these are the initial stages, so we cannot really say that Germany cannot be significant. For France, it's going to be in September. Now, to come back to your question on regulation, it's true that the government said they did not like my bill, clearly enough. But I still believe that governments have responsibilities, and once a bill becomes law, I trust that we will be looking for the best methods that best protect Canadians to carry out age verification. The government will be there. The government will consult experts. So I do not see why there will be any bad faith when it comes to regulation, because it doesn't benefit any Canadian if we have a bad age verification method. Thank you. So you say the best example should be Germany. Answer, that's one of the examples. The British law as drafted looks a lot more like our system, our legal system, and our government system. So right now, looking at the regulations concerning this law, they are now talking about age estimates, age assurances. Yes, you have identity cards, you have more standard methods, but there's also age estimation, which without collecting data enables people to estimate an ages within the range of 2 years. What is interesting in the British law is that they are saying that it's the responsibility of those providing porn to make sure that those methods, which normally should be applied by third parties, are working. So the responsibility is still there. It's stated that if there's a method to be used, not only are they to choose the method, but to implement the method. I have a few seconds left, but I would like to hear you say something. Well, the government says we don't need Bill S210. We have C63. It's not the same thing. C63 is important, but it's not the same thing as S210. Answer, well, I was in favor of the first part of C63, talking about children. There are lots of good things in that bill, but strangely, there is no word on age verification, neither on pornography, which are amongst some of the important dangers that social media is presenting. So I was very disappointed by that. Well, you can say that maybe later on a committee will be set up to decide whether or not age verification is done. I am not reassured, because you need to know that for me it's a very important public health issue, because for the past 15 or 20 years, our children have been subjected to pornography without restriction, and this changes how they look at sexuality, which should be a beautiful thing. So I am for healthy sexuality, but that is not what pornography brings. I understand it's legal for adults, but it was never conceived to be something that children use to learn about sexuality. Not only does it take away all the mystery and dreams, but it makes them adopt horrible behaviors. They become more violent. There's a study that was shocking. More than 47% of young people, men and women, are saying that there must be violence in sexual relations, and that is what girls are expecting. Imagine where we are at. Thank you.
Mr. McGregor, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, for joining us today to help us inform this committee on this bill. You know, I voted in favor of this bill at second reading. I agree with the principle, and I think for a lot of members, not only around this table, but in the House of Commons, you know, many of us are parents, so we come at this not from a professional interest, but also a personal interest. That being said, though, as a lot of my constituents, and indeed many people who know I'm a member of this committee, it's generated a lot of correspondence. So, you know, I come at this personally in trying to balance parents' real concerns over children's access, but also wanting to find a little bit more out about the people who are raising privacy concerns. And that's why I do want to pay particular attention to this study. One of the questions I had, we have received a number of briefs on this bill and recommendations. One of the recommendations was regarding to the ability to verify users' ages at point of access on devices rather than websites. Are you familiar with this technology?
Yes.
And why Could you explain the differences and maybe why you chose one path over the other?
Well, so this technology has been is promoted by Ethical Capital Partner, who's now the new owner of Pornhub. So they've been going around Parliament to promote this technology. I said to them, because we met, I said, listen, if you think you can convince the big Google and other to do it, fine. But at this point, we have, look at this, we have porn sites who are responsible for having let children watch porn for the last 20 years, who are saying, oh no, we're not the one who are going to verify age. Let somebody else do it. So obviously, to start with, it's a little strange. And then this whole idea of having, I have nothing against having some age verification in the telephone, but nobody does it around the world. This technology may be one day possible, but at this point, it's not the case.
And that's because of the sheer variety of devices out there? Like
Well,
some people might be using
because
a laptop, a phone, or an old desktop computer?
It's because you would have to have a lot of Google's, Microsoft, all of them would have to agree to do that. And we have no indication at all that this is a new method that some countries are taking. Nobody has taken this route yet. I'm not saying it's not a great route, but it doesn't exist now.
Now, I want to get into some of the weeds of the bill. So when I go through your bill on page 3, section 6, sub 2, this is the defense, legitimate purpose. So no organization shall be convicted of an offense under section 5 if the act that is alleged to constitute the offense has a legitimate purpose related to science, medicine, education, or arts. Now, if I were to go out in the street and ask people about the term legitimate purpose, I think it's a term that's very open to interpretation. Can you maybe explain what you see it as the bill's sponsor?
Well, I understand that this defense is used in different circumstances. Obviously, there is a question of interpretation, but I would say, that people who say that nude, that essentially showing a nude on the social media would be problematic. I don't think, not only they don't understand this particular definition, but it's larger than that. Sexually explicit material does not refer to simple nudity. It's a term in the criminal code. And and this definition is very, very, very specific. And I will read it in French. Sorry, I have the.
Well, I don't need you to read it. I have it in front
but
of me, and
it's
there in the criminal code.
The goal has to be sexual in nature. It's not only nudity. It has to be there for excitement.
So you feel that clearly helps define the term legitimate purpose, the fact that it is in existence in the criminal code. Okay, that's good. That's what I wanted to know. The other part I wanted to get to was on page 5, section 9, sub 5A. This is about the effect of the federal court order. And in this section, it says that court order may have the effect of preventing persons in Canada from being able to access material other than sexually explicit material made available by the organization that has been given notice. So what other material do you think could be prevented from people having access to, and why did you include this section in the bill? Can you clarify this a little bit more for me?
Okay, so if you permit, I will answer in French on that. D'abord, il faut qu'on.
First of all, you need to understand that before blocking a site, there has to be time for the targeted site to receive notice and 20 days to decide whether or not they will be complying with the law. And then after that, that is assigned to a federal court, which itself deliberates over it and decides whether or not we have attained the stage where that site has to be blocked. I'm trying to say that this is a method that corresponds to Canadian legal standards and protects those that we want to punish because they have recourse. They can turn to the courts to defend themselves. Once all that has been done, and we consider that the pornographic site is not doing anything, it's not taking any action, then the question of blockage comes in. And when the site is blocked, when an internet service provider is told that they can block a site. If, for example, on a website, 50% of the material is pornographic and 50% is non-pornographic, or there's 70 and so on. Once a site is blocked, most of the pornographic material is blocked. Thank you. The reason is simple. It's up to the site to decide whether or not they want to block, or that they want to comply with the law. Let's take the example of a bar. If a bar allows in kids or children who can drink alcohol in the bar, eventually the bar will have its license withdrawn. The license will be withdrawn not only for children, but for adults as well.
Désolé. Mr. McGregor, thank you. We go now to Mr. Jenis. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator. I think it's really important to clarify this issue of site blocking because I think there's been some misinformation around it. So to be really clear, and if you can clarify this, but site blocking is only a penalty for those who persistently refuse to violate the law. So if I commit a crime, I might go to jail. And if I'm sent to jail, that violates my mobility rights and my ability to do all kinds of other things that I would normally be able to do. But that's because I've committed a crime and I'm being penalized for it. In the same way, this bill isn't about site blocking in general. It only allows that to be used as a penalty for those who persistently refuse to follow the law. Is that correct?
This is correct. And if I could add here that in Germany, Twitter was carrying non-porn material and porn material. The government said, you're not doing age verification. And finally, what happened was that Twitter dropped all their porn part. And then they decided by themselves, because they didn't want to be submitted to the age verification law, Twitter just had 60 pages off their site in Germany. So regulations work.
Yeah.
That's what I want to say here.
Thank you. Now on the social media issue, some critics have said, hey, this would apply to social media that choose to host pornographic content and show it to children. But the point would seem to me that if you can't serve alcohol to children at a bar, you also can't serve alcohol to children at an ice cream stand. That if we determine an activity should be age protected, then that age verification has to necessarily exist in every context where that content could be shown to children. The solution is it's not age verification for those sites in general, but it is specifically for the pornographic content we're talking about, because Twitter shouldn't be allowed to show pornography to 9-year-olds. Neither should any other website.
And it's fairly easy to do, because if you've been on Twitter and you've tried to find porn, you will see that there's a page. It announced that sensitive content is coming. So Twitter knows where it is. So it's easy to find, and it can be age blocked, age verify, all those things work. And I would also take this analogy that children, can't go in a bar and drink, but they are allowed to go to restaurant, and then the server is not allowed to have them drink. So it's not so much where, but it's the pornographic content that we're aiming at, and this is where it has to be stopped, because it's obviously not only with porn site, but also on social media platform. And this is where many times the first opportunity for children to have even pops up of pornography.
Yeah. Now, it seems obvious to me that in the world of rapidly evolving technology, there's no way you could put in the text of legislation precisely the kind of age verification method that would be used. That would forestall the process of gradual improvement in terms of effectiveness. But for those who are skeptical of government power in general, what are the safeguards on the regulation-making process that are in the bill and that exist in general?
Well, I would go back to Article 11 because, this is, and this came out of the process in the Senate. This was an amendment because obviously we got the same concerns and we said, okay, let's put real safeguard in the bill, and they are at Article 11, and so the method that will be chosen have to be reliable, maintain user privacy and protects user personal information, collects and use personal information solely for age verification purpose, destroy any personal information collected for age verification purpose once the verification is completed. We're talking here about destroying it, and then generally complies with the best practices. And yes, in truth, how could we have chosen age verification method? I've been on this for 4 years.
Yeah.
The world has evolved and technology has evolved.
Senator, that's extremely clear in the text of the bill. And I guess to conclude my questions, I mean, how do you account for the volume of misinformation, outright disinformation? I think some of it may be coming from certain industry groups, but how do you account for the volume of just nonsense, frankly? Because there are some people that are scared about what would happen if this bill is passed because they don't understand what it's about at all. How do you account for that, and what's your response to that?
Well, I think it's easy to scare people with disinformation. And I'm for me, I'm incapable of understanding that this falsehood becomes more important than protecting all the children. And as we all know, our rights defended by the Charter are not absolute. Yes, freedom of expression exists, and adults will continue to be able to watch porn. But what about the children? What about the children? This is also, they have rights. So, the United Nations is asking countries now to have age verification system. When I started this bill, it was not as well known. Now time passes, and now it's a real public safety issue, and I think it has to be addressed.
Désolé. Mr. Gahir, go ahead, please. 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Clerk, and thank you, Senator, for appearing before the committee. The question that I have is, the legislation that you've proposed doesn't itself include a definition of sexually explicit material or pornography, but it rather refers to a section of the criminal code and making sexually explicit material available to children. Is that right?
Yes.
That's correct. Okay.
It's, I will,
Sure.
We refer to pornography doesn't exist as such in the criminal code to talk about adult sexually explicit material. It exists only to talk about child pornography. So the known term is sexually explicit material, and I would read you the definition because when we read...
So I guess my question is, why didn't you provide a definition of that in your proposed bill? Why are you relying on the definition?
This is the way that it's
code?
done. What I'm doing in this, I'm referring, in the definition, I'm referring to materials, sexually explicit material. And in bills, you don't give the criminal code definition. They stand by themselves in the criminal code because if they're changed, you don't want that to affect your bill.
Sure, that's fair.
So I will, I want to read it in the record what it is.
So I think,
No?
we can
don't want me
read.
to
I just
read
have
it?
limited time, so I do want to get on
Okay.
to my question. If that's okay, I apologize. So by relying on that external definition, were you aware that the majority of online streaming organizations, and we can think of household names like HBO, Hulu, and Netflix, which are commonly available to families across this country, that they're not accessed for their pornographic content, but they do host content that sometimes does contain sensitive aspects and some aspects of sexually explicit material. Were you aware that they would also be implicated within the wording of the bill as it's currently presented?
They were not. No, I didn't consult with them, but I will read you. I think you have to understand what is the definition of sexual.
So again,
But you know,
but I
because
apologize.
because it's not just nudity and it's not sensitive material. I will quote Professor Trudel, who's a specialist of those questions, and who says, and I will quote. You have your translation. So, dans l'arrêt Sharp.
In the Sharp decision, the Canadian Supreme Court specified that the expression explicit sexual activity refers to intimate sexual activity represented in detail and that is clear with the intention to sexually stimulate people that are consuming such material. We are not here.
I guess the aspect that I'm reaching out about is that when you have online content, especially on Netflix or HBO or Hulu, you know, the interpretation could be different of whether that's actually meant to, whether that scene of that entire movie is what it's meant for. Do you believe that the non-pornographic content in these shows that are available across this country, should they be evaluated and regulated and carry the same legal liability that as content that you would propose that you're trying to capture under your bill?
No. I think, you know, I don't really get your question in the sense that they're two different things. You know, scenes of nudity, scenes of love, scenes of are not the same as sexually explicit material. It's been defined by the criminal court. It's been refined by the jurisprudence, and we're talking here about the equivalent of pornography. It's just that the expression used in the criminal code is sexually explicit material. It's
Sure.
the same thing.
I think the worry is that the wording of the bill as it's currently presented is overbroad, and it will capture these areas of content in Canada that are widely available, and that, you know...
This is the definition in the criminal code. There's a definition of pornography, and it's sexually explicit material. So if you don't use this definition, what else do you use? The idea here is to protect the children, the minors, from pornography. And this is the tool we have that has been of service, you know, since decades on that matter.
So as this bill was being drafted and the language is being drafted, was there any consultations done or any sort of work done to ensure that content that's not supposed to be covered is not covered?
Well, yes, I told you, Pierre Trudel was one of the experts testifying, and we have obviously consulted with experts. You know, I've been working on this bill for 4 years, so obviously it's not a perfect bill, but sexually explicit material refers to things that are there to excite, to close up of sexual organs. We're not talking here about very rosy pictures. This is very different. You know, I've watched pornography to do this bill, and you would not find it difficult to differentiate what you see on HBO and when you see on a porn site. I'm sorry to say, it's very, very, very different.
Thank you. We'll have to wrap that up. On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very interesting conversation. I imagine the kind of things you have been dealing with for the past 4 years. You said the bill has been studied twice at the Senate, so clearly some changes must have been made to the bill. A while ago, you talked about Section 11 and said there were some concerns when it comes to privacy issues. Could you please tell us more about some of the changes that have been done since the original version of the bill? Are these changes positive in your opinion? Answer. All the changes that have been done were things I agreed with totally in the first version of the bill. Don't forget, I started working on this bill during the pandemic. Everything was complicated. we made some corrections. I presented amendments to correct 2 errors. The first was that at the beginning, they were talking about persons and not organizations that were targeted in the offense. So there was a danger that the lives of sex workers could be complicated. So the idea was that we were not trying to target individuals, but organizations as defined in the criminal code. That was changed. We also enhanced the second section of the bill to add recourse through the federal court. At the beginning, it was like in some countries, an offense is noted. If the law is not complied with, then there's blocking. So we added the remedy through the federal court to make sure that there would be no political intervention, no ideological intervention in the decisions. Everything had to depend on facts that could be counter-verified or cross-checked by the court. Question: there's no date. Well, there's a date for entry into force for the bill, but for the regulation, is it possible in such a bill to say that the age verification regulation has to enter into force from a certain date? Because we worked on C-21, and the regulations had to enter into force regarding C-71 that was done before. It had not entered into force. It took a few years. How can you make sure that the government would speed up this age verification implementation regulation if it's adopted? Answer: you are right. Age verification should be done. The regulation should be prepared for the bill. It has to be implemented. I think 1 year is a reasonable time, given that we can see what is happening in France, in Great Britain, 2 countries we know well, and they would have set up all their regulations in the coming months. So our government will have examples.
2 minutes and a half, please. So we're going to do the...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, I think the one part I wanted to focus on, and as my colleagues have, is on the regulations section of this bill, like specifically Section 11. Now, 11.1 is very easy to understand, but on 11.2, I just had some questions about the wording, because it says, and I quote, "Before prescribing an age verification method under subsection 1, the governor and council must consider whether the method," and then you've got A through to E. But I question the choice of wording "must consider," because that seems to give the government a way out. Like, oh, we considered these 5 points. Wouldn't it be stronger to say something like the governor and council must verify that it is reliable, that it maintains privacy, that it collects and uses personal information solely for age verification? I think for me as a parent and looking at this, if I actually had wording in the bill that the governor and council must do this rather than considering it, do you see where some people might have concerns? Because the language in the bill might be giving the government a way out. Okay, yes, it has to consider it, but doesn't have to verify that it is actually in place.
I would say that obviously, consider as some strength. But the age verification methods are all different. And from my reading, some will be, some of those won't apply. If you do, for example, age estimation, you're not collecting personal data. So, some of those rules will not apply. So depending on the age verification that will be put in place, you will use them or less. So I think that's why there was a prudence in choosing consider instead of must apply.
Okay. So, so that was the rationale, was because of the different technologies are out there, they wouldn't necessarily all satisfy all of these points.
No.
But given the privacy concerns that are being expressed, wouldn't we want them all to kind of comply with these points? I mean, I don't know if you would want
if
4
there's
out
no
of 5 in this
collecting,
case,
if there's
would
no
you?
collecting of personal information, it doesn't need to apply.
Right.
So I think it leaves some leeway for the different methods chosen. But I take your point.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We go now to Mr. Shipley, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Senator, for being here today. My first question has to do with, I wasn't sure, someone earlier in the hour, I'm not sure if it was the Chair or yourself, Senator, mentioned, and I believe the number was 4 times this different bill you've tried to get through. Could you expand on that? And where and why has that stopped other times?
That's interesting. It's all my life in the 4 last year. Well, not all of it, because I'm a senator on other things too. But yes, I started in 2020. In fact, I went to demonstrate in front of Pornhub against illegal sexual material. You know, they had child pornography. There were some really serious accusation and allegation of child pornography. So I went there, and after this demonstration, I started to talk to myself about, so what are the children doing during this pandemic? And they were on their screens. And that's where the whole idea started to become real. So starting in 2020, I had a first round with my bill, which was, went through the committee. I had tough questions, a lot of questions. I made some changes, and we were still in the pandemic. And then the election was called. So in this process, I had passed in the Senate, the bill was passed in the Senate, and then it died. And then it was off the books. So I had to start all over again after the election, from first reading, and do the whole process again with different people in the committee. And the more I went through it, the more supporters I had. And at the end, there was no opposition in committee and no opposition in the Senate when this bill was passed. So it took a long time, but I'm told it's not completely out of the ordinary, that private member's bill can take time. In this case, I was not served because of the election arriving at the time it arrived.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad I asked that because I thought the number was 4. It sounds like it's been twice, and thanks for the clarification on that. One of the concerns, obviously, I don't think anybody in this room feels that children should be accessing any types of pornography. But one of the issues is, quite frankly, is the age verification in the process. You had mentioned, and the bill mentions, that this is going to be done by a third-party company. Are there currently any Canadian companies who do this type of business, and who would they do it for? I mean, just specifically the age verification.
Yoti, mais c'est pas canadien. Yoti is one of the main players, but it has a place of business, I think, on the West Coast, but it's originally from Britain. YOTI. So this is one of the big players in age verification. There's quite many of them, but I think as a Canadian, there's one.
To interrupt, though, do you know who or what? There's a joke there, but I'll leave Mr. Biddle alone on that one. Who? You really threw me off there. Who or what industries are they age verifying? You mentioned the company, but what are they doing now? What other for who? For what?
Well, it's a good question. I know there's age verification, for example, in betting online, but is it done by age verifier or in this case by the credit card? So I don't think we have a lot of age verifying in Canada. I'm sorry, I'm not able to answer intelligently your question. Would you want me to send you
That'd be a good answer. As I said, I'd like to know.
I think I have not researched that part.
Look at that. I've thrown you right there a loop. So there you go. That's why we're here. But yeah, I would like to know a couple of the names of companies and what industries they're currently doing. for age verification. One of the other studies we've recently done in here was about cybersecurity, and it was astounding to hear about some of the companies, governments, big organizations who have been hacked, and a lot of private information has been taken or ransomed. Are you concerned about that at all with this? You know, we've heard of one Canadian company. I'm sure there's others, hopefully. We don't know the size of them. We don't know who they're doing. Do you have any concerns with them and their cybersecurity of personal information?
I think we're all concerned, but you know, when you have companies like Desjardins in Quebec, where we put our money, who has that type of problems, it obviously can happen everywhere. But I'm wondering, why would it be more of a problem or of a risk, I should say, with pornography than with banking, with all kind of other sectors? It's, you know, once you start to be on the web and to transmit information on the web and do banking on the web, all those things exist. But as I say, on this question, in Germany, where they have the longest experience, they have not been les fuites de données, big scandals on that side with privacy of data.
Merci, Madame. Thank you. We go now to Mr. Before I carry on, so feel free, obviously, to submit any further information you may wish to the committee.
Sir, a good question.
And they'll be distributed. We'll go now to Mr. Biddle for the hammer. 5 more minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Before I ask my question, Senator, I do want to say that I think we all do appreciate the goal that you're trying to accomplish. I do have many concerns about how we're attempting to accomplish this. And I'll give it through an example. One of my favorite shows of all time is Game of Thrones. Love that show. Became obsessed with it, saw it, watched it through, watching the spin-offs. It's on a Canadian provider, Crave. It would be covered by this legislation as it's defined. And so I have staff who I know are fans of Bridgerton on Netflix, which is another internet service provider that provides what is defined as sexually explicit content. But I know you're trying to prevent children from seeing pornography, but you didn't define in your legislation pornography, you defined sexually explicit content. And so things like the shows that I mentioned, even Academy Award-winning movies, Schindler's List, English Patient, Shakespeare in Love, Gladiator, Crash, 12 Years a Slave, Shape of Water, Green Book, Parasite, based on the definition in the criminal code, these would all be covered. And so I guess my question is to you is why this overly broad definition, and why didn't you come up with a stronger, stricter definition of pornography rather than just using the sexually explicit definition in the criminal code?
Monsieur Biddle, si vous le permettez, je vais vous répondre.
Mr. Biddle, if you allow me, I'll answer in French. But I totally disagree with your premise, because neither Game of Thrones nor Bridgerton, which I watch religiously, contain pornography. Neither do they contain sexually explicit material as defined in the criminal code. Here, I have the impression that you are not referring to the definition of sexually explicit material as drafted in the criminal code.
Much time. I'm looking right at the definition now. Dominant characteristic of which, and this is sexually explicit material, the dominant characteristic of which is the depiction for a sexual purpose of a person's genital organs or anal region, or if the person is female, her breasts. That is section 171.1 sub 5. Yep. That is very broad when it comes to what Canadians see on television, which they access without a digital ID. And you're proposing to change that and alter that. I think Canadians expect that when they go on to Netflix or Crave or the platforms, Amazon Prime, that they're able to access these shows without a digital ID to be able to do so. you're coming at this, and there's an old Supreme Court decision from the United States about pornography. I know it when I see it. And you're kind of making that position now and pointing us to, well, there's this criminal code definition, but it is very broad, Senator, and it is going to capture so much more content than I know you don't intend to. But this is the language of the legislation. And how can Canadians be assured that they won't be brought into this based on the wording of the legislation that I've just read? And I know you've been trying to read it to some of my other colleagues.
Yes, because, contrary to you, I don't think this is that broad. And I believe that if you look at the jurisprudence on how those particular 3 words have been interpreted by court, you will see, and earlier I quoted Professor Trudel, who was quoting the Sharp decision.
Judge.
No, he's not a judge.
Yes.
But he's an expert, and he's a legal expert. So, you're right that we can always say there's a danger. But what would you suggest? What kind of definition would we suggest? Because pornography.
Again, Senator, you're in a we know it when we see it kind of item. I don't have much more time. I don't have much more time left, but I'll point. We've left the agency you've left the agency that's going to police this very vague. But really, the only agency that exists that the federal government has is the CRTC. Is this what you expect? Who you will expect will be policing this legislation?
I did not include it because I didn't want to have to weigh on that. I think those decisions.
But that's the most likely agency to deal with it, yes or no? The RCMP?
No. It's just that
it'll be the CRTC. They are the most likely competent agency to deal with this.
it has remained undefined because, as you know yourself, your own government is these days trying to have a commission, an ombudsman, and all those things.
But you'll agree with me, it's the CRTC is most likely. You don't want it in there because it wouldn't be popular, but you'll agree with me that the CRTC is the most likely agency to deal with this.
I'm not agreeing with you.
So some mythical agency that the government will create is a better agency to deal with it? So with respect to agencies that exist, Senator, you agree with me, this is the agency that is most likely to police this particular piece of legislation.
We're going to have to cut it off with, you may answer, and then we'll cut it off.
Well, I'm not gonna be pushed to answer with a question. You agree with me? It's not the kind of question I like. We have not defined in the bill who it is, so you can certainly think what you're thinking, but I would come back to the fact that, what would you have done to define pornography without taking the definition of the criminal code, which is one of our main law in Canada, and which is serious, and which has been interpreted by all the courts as being pornography, not as being, artsy pictures of whatever. And, you're right that there's a dose, it's not scientific. But I would say this definition is pretty good and has been used in the past to show that this is not light. This is pornography we're talking about when we're using sexually explicit material. So we disagree.
Merci. So thank you both. Thank you to Mr. Lussier and Senator for bearing with us here tonight. And with that, we will, this concludes this portion of the meeting. We'll suspend and bring in the next panel. Suspended. So I call this meeting back to order. I would like to welcome our witnesses for this second hour. From the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, we have Mr. Philippe Dufresne, Privacy Commissioner of Canada. We have Lara Ives, Executive Director, Policy, Research, and Parliamentary Affairs, Directorate. And we have from the Department of Canadian Heritage, we have Owen Ripley, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Cultural Affairs. We have Katie O'Meara, Policy Analyst. And we have Galen Teschner Weaver, Policy Analyst. So I missed the hyphen in there first. So now, Mr. Dufresne, thank you for waiting, and you've been very patient. And I now invite you to make an opening statement of 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to appear on your study of Bill S-210, an act to restrict young persons' online access to sexually explicit material. As Privacy Commissioner, my mandate is to protect and promote individuals' fundamental right to privacy. This includes providing advice, guidance, and recommendations for protecting personal information and overseeing compliance with Canada's two federal privacy laws, the Privacy Act, which applies to federal government institutions, and the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, or PIPEDA, which is Canada's federal private sector privacy law. In January, I launched my strategic plan for my office, which is focused on 3 priority areas: maximizing the OPC's impact on promoting and protecting the fundamental rights to privacy, addressing and advocating for privacy in times of technological change, and championing the privacy rights of children.
Purposes of Bill S-210, which include protecting the mental health of young people from the harmful effects of being exposed to sexually explicit material. The bill does raise some privacy implications, and I would propose some changes to address them. As drafted, the bill provides that any organization that makes sexually explicit material available online to a young person for commercial purposes is guilty of an offense and liable to a fine that would increase in amounts depending on whether it was a first or subsequent offense. A defense is available if an organization believes that the young person was at least 18 years of age, having implemented a prescribed age verification method to limit access to the sexually explicit material. Age verification can raise privacy implications as it generally requires the collection of personal information, which could include biometrics or identity documentation. As drafted, the bill would apply to services such as social media and search engines that may make available some sexually explicit material, but that may be primarily focused on other content. This could result in age verification requirements that, including when the majority of content may not be of a sexually explicit nature. To address this, the committee could consider restricting the requirement for age verification to websites that primarily provide sexually explicit material for commercial purposes. Avant de prescrire un mécanisme de vérification de l'âge, le gouvernement...
Before presiding the age verification method, the Governor and Council will need to consider certain criteria, including whether the method maintains user privacy and protects users' personal information. I would recommend these criteria are important. I will recommend adding additional criteria to the list to ensure that the prescribed methods are sufficiently privacy protective. Specifically, this could include assessing whether the prescribed methods are proportionate and limit the collection of personal information to what is strictly necessary for the verification. Age verification methods should also prevent tracking or profiling of individuals across visits to websites or services.
Jurisdictions have taken action to prevent children from accessing pornography, but some of these laws have a narrower application than Bill S-210. For example, Texas and Utah only require age verification measures on sites that meet a certain threshold of pornographic content. Some regulators have also worked to mitigate the privacy risk associated with the use of age verification technologies. For example, Spanish and French regulators have worked with researchers to develop and evaluate potential age verification mechanisms. Le commissariat poursuit ses recherches dans ce domaine.
My office is conducting further research in this area and is a member of an international working group with other privacy regulators to share information on age verification methods and learn from each other's experiences. Notably, members of this working group intend to publish a joint statement of principles for age assurance later this year. My office is also developing guidance for organizations on age assurance and privacy and will launch an exploratory consultation on this next month.
10 be adopted, I will be happy to provide advice on regulations that pertain to privacy and the protection of personal information at the appropriate time. I will be pleased to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dufresne. We'll go now to Mr. Ripley. I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting me to appear before you to discuss Bill S210. As Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for Cultural Affairs at the Department of Canadian Heritage, I am responsible for the proposed Online Harms Act contained in Bill C-63. During elaboration of C-63, the department heard directly from experts, survivors, civil society, and members of the public on what should be done to combat the proliferation of harmful content online. A common theme emerged from these consultations: the vulnerability of children online and the need to take proactive measures to protect them. It is with this in mind that the Online Harm Bill proposes a duty to protect children, which will require platforms to incorporate age-appropriate design features. Furthermore, Bill C-63 also proposes a specialized regulatory authority with the skills and expertise to develop regulations, guidelines, and codes of practice in consultation with experts and civil society.
10 seeks to achieve a similarly admirable goal of protecting children online. However, the bill is highly problematic for a number of reasons, including a scope that is much too broad, both in terms of regulated services as well as regulated content, possible risk to Canadians' privacy, especially considering the current state of age verification frameworks internationally, structural incoherence that seems to mix criminal elements with regulatory elements, a troubling dependence on website blocking as the primary enforcement mechanism, and finally, a lack of clarity around implementation and an unrealistic implementation timeline. I'll briefly unpack a few of these concerns in greater detail. As drafted, Bill S210 would capture a broad range of websites and services that make sexually explicit material available on the internet for a commercial purpose, including search engines, social media platforms, streaming and video on demand applications, and internet service providers. Moreover, the bill's definition of sexually explicit material is not limited to pornography, but instead extends to a broader range of mainstream entertainment content with nudity or sex scenes, including content that would be found on services like Netflix, Disney Plus, or CBC Gem. Mandating age verification requirements for this scope of services and content would have far-reaching implications for how Canadians access and use the internet. While efforts are underway globally in other jurisdictions to develop and prescribe age verification technologies, there is still a lack of consensus that they are sufficiently accurate and sufficiently privacy-respecting. For example, France and Australia remain concerned that the technology is not yet sufficiently mature, and testing of various approaches is ongoing. Over the next couple of years, the UK will ultimately require age assurance for certain types of services under its Online Safety Act, and Ofcom is currently consulting on the principles that should guide the rollout of these technologies. But the requirement is not yet in force, and services do not yet have to deploy age assurance at scale. And in jurisdictions that have already moved ahead, such as certain U.S. states or Germany, there continues to be questions about privacy, effectiveness, and overall compliance. In short, these international examples show that mandates regarding age verification or age assurance are still a work in progress. There is also no other jurisdiction proposing a framework comparable in scope to Bill S210. Website blocking remains a highly contentious enforcement instrument that poses a range of challenges and could impact Canadians' freedom of speech and Canada's commitment to an open and free internet and net neutrality. Je tiens à refermer une fois de
I'd like to reiterate once again that the government remains committed to better protecting children online. However, in the government's view, the answer is not to prescribe a specific technology that creates a danger for privacy and breaches our commitment towards an open internet. It is essential that all measures developed to achieve this objective create a framework that is both flexible and informed about what needs to be done to protect children online. Thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take your questions.
Thank you for your remarks. We'll go now to our questions. We'll start with Mr. Caputo with 6 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here on this important matter. I think that it goes without saying that everybody around this table believes that protecting children from materials that they shouldn't be consuming is of great importance, particularly sexually explicit materials. I have a 10-year-old son, and it's unfortunately time to have the talk because we heard in the Senator's prior testimony about 10% of 9-year-olds, I believe, was the statistic. I had to step out, but I was going to verify that was the statistic. So clearly there is a pressing and substantial public interest in restricting children from this type of material. Can I ask to the Privacy Commissioner, did you appear at the Senate committee or send any briefs or anything like that?
No, I did not.
Okay, thank you. The focus, a lot of what I'm looking at here, and the Privacy Commissioner did speak about regulation. Could any of the concerns you mentioned be allayed through appropriate regulation, sir?
I mentioned one aspect with respect to the scope of the organization captured, so that may be something that would require change to the statute. But yes, the regulations, we recommend necessity and proportionality. We recommend no tracking of individuals with this information. These are consistent with international best practices and agreements between my colleagues. They could be put in regulation. If the statute adds the criterion, then it's just a more certainty that the government will follow through on that. But either way, I will certainly be making recommendations to the government at the recommendation stage with respect to those contents.
So just for example, on the tracking of individuals, and I'm looking at the regulation section, which is sub 2 that I'm focused on. You're probably well aware of that section. I'll let you find section 11 sub 2 here. Sorry, if you could turn to section 11, yes. Sub 2, please. So when we're looking at the tracking of individuals, which is something that as Privacy Commissioner is probably chief or salient among your concerns, when I look at sub C and sub D, talking about the collection of personal information solely for age verification purposes and except to the extent required by law, and the destruction of any such information once the verification is completed, especially when it comes to sub D, does that not address the concern with tracking? Because my reading of the legislation is that tracking wouldn't be permitted on that basis.
I want to make sure that there's as much clarity as possible on those points. So certainly that would be an argument to put forward in terms of make sure the regulations preclude that. And if that's the understood interpretation by the government in adopting the regulation, then that leads to the right outcome. I'm flagging that monitoring or profiling or using this for advertising or any other different purposes is a concern. And so we should be explicit about that, either in the statute or at a minimum in the regulations themselves.
And the reason I'm asking for this is not to push back, but just to give you my reading, because when I read this, when I read sub C, for instance, collects and uses personal information solely for age verification purposes, when I read that, for instance, that to me would preclude the use of this information for marketing. I don't think you can get much clearer than the term solely for instance. Do you see where I'm coming from there?
I understand that, and I think that when we're looking at age verification, given some of the concerns, and in order to provide information to Canadians and to reassure them about what are we talking about here, and is there a clear contradiction between age verification and privacy? No, you can have both of those things, but you need to have an age verification system that is appropriate and is designed with privacy as top of mind. So again, making sure that this is not information that can lead to those outcomes.
Certainly. Where I'm going with this is that when I read Section 11, Sub 2, it's my view that an appropriate balance can be struck based on the instructions that the section gives us in terms of how the regulations should operate. In other words, data is only to be used for age verification, and it's not to be used for any other reason, and it is to be destroyed once that's once the goal, as in age verification, has been accomplished. To me, that seems like it's going fairly far in addressing any privacy concerns, because the whole point here is to preclude children from accessing harmful information, and we're saying you have to record only for this purpose, you can't use it for any other purpose, and you must destroy. I'm just trying to see how we could actually go any further in regulation than that.
Well, other data protection authorities have set this out, for instance, my Spanish colleagues, as explicitly as a principle, saying this should not be used for tracking, this should not be used for profiling. So I think being absolutely clear on that, as I say, whether in the bill or in the regulation themselves, I think is important. Technology can evolve, tracking technologies can evolve. This has to be technology neutral. We need to make sure that the principle will capture whatever advances in technology, and that it is used to verify age and for nothing else.
Thank you. The fact that it could be used in regulation, I think, satisfies where I was going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Caputo. We go now to Mr. Biddle. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here. And I agree with Mr. Caputo in that I think around the table we'd all like to see the same thing in terms of children not having access to it. But I'd like to start with Mr. Dufresne. You mentioned in your comments about changes required perhaps to narrow the focus of the legislation. And I had mentioned in previous questioning that I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan. I won't ask you if you've seen it. I don't want to put you on the hot seat, but if that is a question to put one on the hot seat. But would shows like that put a company like Crave, which is, I believe, owned by Bell, potentially under the scope of this legislation if we don't bring in amendments like you suggest?
Well, again, this would be up to the courts and the organization that would look into that. But I think that you look at the definition, sexually explicit material in the criminal code, it is describing photographic, film, or visual representation. A person engaged in explicit sexual activity could be written material whose dominant characteristic is the description for sexual purpose of explicit sexual activity. So it raises that question of what will be captured, and so bringing that clarity. I understand that the purpose of this is to capture pornographic websites and other types of visual images and so on, and protect children from that. So that's one of the points that I'm highlighting.
Yeah, I guess I'll ask the same question to Mr. Ripley, because when I originally saw this bill, I just started thinking of movies that I had seen. I listed a few, like Schindler's List or Green Book or Crash, Gladiator, movies that I think we all know or can all agree are artistic, and I believe all have won Academy Award for Best Picture, though we may disagree that some of those films should have won in that year. But Mr. Ripley, would this bill capture those films in if they were put on a website?
The government's position is yes, they would be captured because the definition of sexually explicit material that is being proposed would include things like the depiction of sex scenes or nudity, where again it's nudity for a sexual purpose. So those services would be required to institute age verification to access that kind of content. I think what needs to be understood is the definition that's being proposed makes sense in the context of the criminal code, where it's speaking to a variety of offenses, including when adults may be engaging with minors using sexually explicit content, and so it makes sense in that context. But it is not limited strictly to pornography. It is broader than pornography and would capture, again, things like sex scenes or nudity.
To Mr. Ripley, I know we've talked about the CRTC a lot in your when I was on a different committee, and you were a witness there. But it would seem to be, and perhaps you can correct me, the most likely organization to be policing this legislation would be the CRTC. I was wondering if you could explain that, or if there are any other organizations that you're aware of that would be involved in that.
Thank you for the question. So the government is concerned about the implementation proposed by the bill. To be clear, the way that this would play out is there would be a minister designated, and then that minister would need to make a proposal to the Governor and Council or to Cabinet about which federal department or agency is best placed to administer this piece of legislation. And so if it was adopted as is, indeed, a minister would have to canvass the existing agencies or departments and make an assessment about which is best able. And I would highlight that in the context of the Online Harms Act, the government ultimately came to the conclusion that there is not an existing entity, whether it be the CRTC or, with all respect to the person sitting next to me, the Privacy Commissioner, who is well equipped to play that role. The government is of the opinion that we need an entity that has the right expertise and the right framework in order to regulate, the online space as it relates to online harms, and that is why the government is proposing the creation of a new entity to make sure that the oversight of this space is done appropriately with the right safeguards in place.
I guess back quickly to Mr. Dufresne, because it was mentioned, do you think your office would be in a position to police this legislation?
This particular legislation, as I say, we would take on the mandate that Parliament will give us and fulfill it to the best of our abilities. But I don't think that the intention would be that this is something that my office would deal with. With the caveat that in terms of regulation making, we are happy to provide advice and input and be consulted on that to ensure that this is done with a privacy lens.
Thank you so much. I don't have much time, but if I could turn to Mr. Ripley, if he could expand on Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, with respect to what the government is intending to do with respect to protecting individuals from harms that are on the internet.
Thank you for the question. So the Online Harms Act would apply to social media services, and it proposes 3 core duties, one of which was alluded to earlier, is the duty to protect children. That is fashioned as quite a flexible duty, which would permit the Digital Safety Commission to put in place a number of different kinds of measures or obligations to better protect Canadian children in the online space through the use of age-appropriate design. And so the government's view is that is a sufficiently flexible duty that could accommodate a question about whether there are certain services, for example, that should use age assurance or age verification mechanisms. But the government's view is that framework has the appropriate safeguards in place, and there would actually be a regulator with that mandate and the necessary expertise through consultation with civil society and experts to do that in an accurate way and in a privacy-respecting way if it was to be considered.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
On to Ms. Michaud for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being with us today. We appreciate it tremendously. This is a very interesting conversation we've been having, and I understood that the government was reluctant to support it, and I didn't know why. Now it's becoming clearer to me. I understand that the definition of sexually explicit material for you is too broad. I'm looking for a solution here. I'm looking for a solution to make it more acceptable for you. Should the bill have mentioned pornography directly, explicitly, and defined it in the bill directly instead of using the term sexually explicit material? Would that have changed any minds for you? Would it have made it more acceptable? Maybe not acceptable per se, but wouldn't it lower the chance that a nudity scene in a movie be included in this bill and targeted by it? Thank you for the question. I cannot take any position on potential amendments to the bill, but what I will say, and if I understood properly the intentions of the senator, I believe that her intention is to target pornography specifically. As you mentioned, the definition of pornography is broader, or rather the definition of sexually explicit material is broader than that of pornography. So if it is the intention of the senator and members around the table is to truly target pornography, we could talk about how that definition could be amended to make it less broad, because at the moment it is quite broad indeed. That was a first question I had. You also have concerns with regard to privacy and people's data. Can you elaborate on those concerns with regard to privacy? In addition, I know that we also make comparisons with Bill C-63, but these two are quite different to me. Yes, we want to protect children from online harmful content with Bill 63. It's a perfectly laudable objective. There's also seems to be an objective of limiting access to sexually explicit materials and pornography. You want to create a body with C-63, and that looks like the Online Digital Safety Commission would be quite effective at fighting that, and other commissions in other countries play a similar role for age verification. Can you talk about your other concerns you may have? Yes, thank you for these questions. When it comes to Bill C-63, in a context where the objective of the legislation is to promote online safety and to fight back against harmful content, and rather to protect them against harmful content, there is a duty to protect children created under Section 64, and it's quite supple, flexible to date. It says that there is a duty to protect children in compliance with Section 5. In addition, Section 65 gives the Commission some powers to follow a series of duties and obligations that must be integrated in the implementation of the Commission's duties. The government has the flexibility to look at social media and define ways to better protect children. During these hearings, we can certainly think about the appropriateness of adopting age verification writ large. But once again, we're doing this today in the context of having a regulator with specific needed expertise. In addition, there are mechanisms that have been developed to consult with civil society and to consult with experts to ensure that these solutions are well-founded. Thank you. I imagine that you've been looking at what's going on in other countries, including the countries that were mentioned earlier. We mentioned Germany, the UK, France. Senator Miville Deschênes' proposal to use a third party and not do business with pornography sites to do age verification, she suggested that. Do you believe this is the appropriate way to move forward on this? Yes, we are looking at any new developments on the international scale. The government does not disagree that there is a lot of developments happening, but we say that we do not have enough experience with this when compared to our international partners such as Australia and France. Australia and France have been studying this, and they are testing various solutions as we speak. They haven't completed their work up to date. We've seen that in the United States, for example, as you've said, there is a need to have the digital infrastructure in place and the legal infrastructure to do so. In Louisiana, for example, there are state verifications that have been incorporated to permit that access. Other states have moved legislation. And some sites have shut down in those states because the infrastructure does not exist yet. There are, in essence, many solutions. For example, tokens that can be used to verify age. And there are also face scanning solutions, facial recognition. What's important is that these solutions are implemented in a context where there are safeguards to ensure that people's privacy is not compromised. We do not want to create a framework that sets out an obligation or a duty without knowing full well that the safeguards are in place. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Michaud.
We'll go now to Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Dufresne, I'd like to start with you. I just need some clarification. So your opening remarks, you had recommended that the committee consider restricting the requirement for age verification to websites that primarily provide sexually explicit material for commercial purposes. So, where exactly would you like to see us do that? I mean, I know in the interpretation section of this bill, it has a definition for organization, same meaning as Section 2 of the Criminal Code. Is that where you'd like to see a little bit more specificity, or can you identify?
Sure. Well, it could be in the definition. It could be in the offense, talking about makes available or primarily makes available. We've pointed to international comparators in Texas and Utah where they talk about substantially, or talk about sometimes even a third. They reference a third of the material. So just a quantitative requirement could be a way of targeting those broader websites, pornographic websites.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to turn, I know you had an exchange with Mr. Caputo on Section 11. I know you had recommended some additional criteria. My question is really on 11.2, the wording before we get to the list, because I asked this to the senator. It just says, before prescribing an age verification method under subsection 1, the governor in general must consider whether the method. Are you satisfied with language that says must consider, or would you prefer language that forces the governor and council to actually follow these? Like, for me personally, I look at that gives the government a little bit of a way out, like, oh, we addressed 3 out of 5, we did consider everything. But if the governor and council was forced to verify that it is reliable, that it maintains privacy, that it collects and uses personal information solely for age verification purposes. Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I think you asked a good question. I think the senator gave a good answer to your question in terms of this is in the bill. There's an expectation that the governor and council will consider this. It's explicit. Would I prefer stronger language? The mechanism must include the following things, or I think that's stronger language, and I would be supportive of that. But I think that the requirement of must consider, I also tend to presume good faith on the government that they're going to draft regulations. This statute says this. If it's completely absent, then it's an obvious element to raise. And I would certainly, as I say, expect to be consulted on the development of regulations of that nature, and I would be making recommendations to make sure they're privacy protective.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Ripley, I'd like to turn to you. I know that you did express hesitation on forming an opinion on possible amendments that this committee might consider. But that being said, like, we also as committee members need to know that if we are going to make amendments, how they're going to be perceived by the government. And I know that you were hesitant to, expand a little bit on the definition of what sexually explicit material is. But I guess I want to know from the department's point of view, how open to interpretation are you? Like, do you need us as a committee to create much more specific language? How do you, we want to know from your point of view what you need us to do. Like, help us help you.
Thank you for the question. And again, I would reiterate that I'm not in a position to take a position on behalf of the government with respect to amendments. But what I would point you towards is that, again, the problematic aspects of the definition in the criminal code are really the subparagraph A, where you do not see, like you see in subparagraphs B and C, for example, the caveat of for sexual purpose, right? And so, again, in subparagraph A, the language is broad enough to capture sex scenes or nudity, regardless of whether they are being shown for a sexual purpose, for example. And so, again, it would capture entertainment content.
Again, if we go ahead in the bill to page 4, section 8.1, and this is where we're talking about the enforcement authority. If the enforcement authority has reasonable grounds to believe that an organization has committed an offense under section 5, so how do you interpret reasonable grounds? I mean, do we not trust people to know the difference between a movie on Netflix and what is obviously pornography? I mean, a movie, as Mr. Biddle recommended, that has very sexually explicit scenes, it's not being commercially made available for that single purpose. It's a part of a story. Whereas I think we all know that pornography, its main raison d'etre is that sexually explicit material.
So thank you. The challenge is the definition that the bill is based on. The definition of sexually explicit material is not limited to pornography. So the offense in paragraph 5 is any organization that for commercial purposes makes available sexually explicit material on the internet to a young person is guilty of an offense, right? And so the reasonable ground to believe is whether they've made sexually explicit material available. And again, there's nothing in the definition of sexually explicit material that limits it to pornography. As I mentioned, that subparagraph A of the definition of photographic, film, video, or other visual representation, whether or not was made by electronic or mechanical means, that shows a person who is engaged in or is depicted as engaged in explicit sexual activity. There's no limitation there that it's pornographic. And then the next one, the dominant characteristic of which is the depiction for a sexual purpose. You see the sexual purpose. So again, there's certain places where you see this caveat, and that first subparagraph that I read doesn't have that limitation.
I also want to refer that those two are separated by an or, not an and, which is an important part to make. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Okay, we'll start our second round now with, so this is a 5 minute, and 2.5. We will end this round. I think the consensus is after Mr. McGregor. So we will start with Mr. Jennings for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Look, we're obviously familiar with the Liberal government's position on this bill, and with respect to the officials, of course, you're in a position to support that position. Your role as an official is not to come here and state your disagreement with government policy, even if you might privately disagree with government policy. I will just say, I think that many of the arguments you put forward were clearly refuted by the senator already, and I also want to just say that I think Bill C-63 is a real disaster. It raises actual censorship issues. It has nothing on age verification. It's far broader than S210 at every level. It's enforced by kind of vaguely empowered bureaucratic agencies that include dealing with speech. So, I think most Canadians who have seen what your government, and to be fair, I understand your role as a nonpartisan public servant, fearless advice and faithful implementation, but what the Liberal government has put forward is not being received well, I think, across the board in terms of Bill C-63. Just on the issues with Section 171, look, I'm looking at the criminal code and trying to understand the argument here, but we have one definition of sexually explicit material in the criminal code, and implicitly, it's sort of being suggested that maybe we could have multiple different definitions of sexually explicit material operating at the same time. But it seems eminently logical that you would have one definition that relies on the existing jurisprudence. And look, if, as Mr. Biddle has suggested, if this definition covers Game of Thrones, then it's already a problem because it's already violates the criminal code if in the commission of another offense you were to show a child that material. So you already could run afoul of the criminal code if you put on Game of Thrones in your home for your 16-year-old. That's not happening. No one's getting arrested and going to jail because they let their 16-year-old watch Game of Thrones. So if that's not happening already offline, then maybe that suggests that this extensive reinterpretation of what the existing law already says is a little bit exaggerated. And look, in this context, we also know that Pornhub has been represented by a well-connected Liberal lobbyist who has met with Liberals in the lead up to the vote. I want to ask the Privacy Commissioner about what he said in terms of potential amendments. Social media, how this would apply on social media. So I'm going to just pose the question that, look, I've got young children. I obviously don't want them accessing the major well-known pornography websites. I also don't want them seeing pornographic material on any other website that they might go to for a legitimate purpose. So if my children are on social media, or I mean, they're not, but if they were on another website, if they were watching a YouTube video and an ad, whatever it was, I would want to ensure that 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds were not accessing pornography, regardless of the platform and regardless of the percentage of that company's overall business model it is. So I don't really understand philosophically why it would make sense or protect anyone's privacy to have an exemption for sites where it's just a small part of what they do, because if the point is to protect children, then the point is to protect children wherever they are. I'd be curious for your response to that.
There's been discussions, if we look at the UK age-appropriate code, or we're looking at general design for sites for children. So there can be a range of tools that can be used. There could be parental approval. There could be education. There could be, and so a big part of the discussion is the risk-based approach. So the higher the risk, the higher the tool you're going to use. And so if you go to the age verification, that's a higher level tool than parental or education or outreach. So all of those things can be considered. But if the goal is to get at pornographic websites, I raised the question in terms of the numerical element. So
yeah, I mean, I would say, I'll give it back to you in a moment, but I would just say the goal is to prevent my children, other people's children, from accessing sexually explicit material on the internet. And in the same way that we don't let children access alcohol, if they're accessing alcohol in a bar or at a hotel that has many other lines of business, the point is children shouldn't be accessing alcohol. And so given that there already are age gates on, for instance, some of these sites, the Senator mentioned on well, it's not really an effect, but on Twitter there is already a kind of letting you know you're going into a particular area here. It doesn't seem like it would be difficult to apply that age verification principle everywhere where that kind of material exists.
Well, some of the principles that we put forward often are necessity and proportionality, and making sure that you're using the least amount of personal information for your goals. And so that's why I'm talking about necessity and proportionality in the regulations, not tracking, using, again, the smallest amount and asking Canadians to provide the least amount possible of personal information. That said, age verification is appropriate in appropriate context.
Well, and I hope you're significantly engaged on the regulation, obviously, because you have a lot of expertise to offer at that point. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. McDonald. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. Extremely important topic, and I think we're all trying to get to the same result, and that's protect children as much as possible. I want to go back to Mr. Dufresne, and I was trying to find some information on the program that's being used in Spain. So I was wondering if do you have the name of that program that they actually use for verification?
Well, they're developing information on potential tools that would be third-party tools that would verify your age. And the goal would be that when you're verified by this tool, then you go to a website. You're not giving your age to that website. It just says, I've been verified. And so they've issued documentation. They call it the Decalogue of Principles. And they talk about what are the things we want to see in there. One of them is no tracking. One of them is risk, mitigate risk, use it for the appropriate purposes. And they have been working on potential tools. My French colleagues as well. Australia is doing a pilot project to test this out. So there's work happening, and we're going to continue this work with our colleagues internationally to develop principles and then work with industry.
So do you see anything in the effect of these two proposals that you have put forward to countries like your counterparts in Spain or the U.S. and say, is this being incorporated into the technology verification that they potentially could use?
Well, we're working very closely with them with the goal of issuing a joint statement of principles to say, here's what we want to see as a community in terms of age verification tools. Here are the principles. I'll be doing some consultation later in Canada to see here's what we propose. Here's how we get this balance. But again, making sure that you're using this to identify the age, or not the age, the specific age, but the fact that the person is a minor or an adult, that you have, you can do this anonymously, that there are some checks and balance, that there's safeguards for that information. You don't want that information to be breached and then lead to challenges. So we're looking at a full spectrum of principles, but also the technological implications.
So we heard in here today a little bit about reporting mechanisms, enforcement, maybe not clear on it, digital literacy, partnerships with tech companies. I guess just for my own verification, when we're using a third-party technical company and we're dealing with, say, Pornhub, and there is some sort of infraction, although Pornhub is not necessarily, and I'm assuming this, and Pornhub is only getting the information that says, yes, this individual is 18 years old, or no, the individual is not 18 years old. So if there's some infraction with the technical company, who's liable? Is it Pornhub who hired the technical company, or is government responsible for the technical company? Like, where's that liability lay?
Well, I think the bill as drafted would say that it's a defense for the organization, in this case Pornhub, that to have believed the person was not a minor, and that they would have done that by using the age verification mechanism prescribed by law. So if the mechanism, there is a breach, there is concern there, I think that would then get raised and would raise questions about that tool and the provider.
Pornhub would not necessarily be the responsibility or the liability. It would be the technical company.
We'd have to see the case-by-case scenario. Pornhub would have to establish that it has met its obligation under the Act, which is to verify the age with the prescribed mechanism.
So I know the senator mentioned, and I never had a question to the senator, obviously, but double anonymous method verification. Can anybody explain what that exactly is for me or for us?
So my understanding would be, again, there's a variety of systems in place to protect an individual's privacy. So again, a token-based system whereby, that entity validates that you are of 18, and then the technology when you go to, access, a pornographic website or something like that. There's no identifying information in that token that you use. For example, again, other technologies around facial scanning or whatnot in an environment where, again, there's no personal information that is being held. And again, that would be the objective, to make sure that infrastructure is in place. But again, what we are seeing internationally is that jurisdictions are still working through this. It's been years, and there's not consensus yet on the accuracy and privacy ensuring nature of these. And in this context, we have a 1-year implementation timeline where the minister would have to choose an entity. That entity would then have to do the appropriate consultations and put in place the framework. Otherwise, every service that is in violation of this bill is theoretically subject to committing an offense, and therefore subject to potential website blocking.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Thank you. Okay, we go. On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud.
Proceeding with Ms. Michaud for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to get back to the definition of sexually explicit material, and I think that my colleague, Mr. Jennis, had a good point. He said that, well, there could be a nudity scene in a film or a movie or a show, and that could be considered as sexually explicit material if Bill S210 is adopted. Therefore, we could have questions that could arise about current sexually explicit materials that are available. If there is a scene in a movie that is recognized as sexually explicit, from this point, it's almost as if it would have already be considered as such. So I'm not really sure where your concerns arise. Anyone can answer this question. Thank you. It's a good question. If you look in the criminal code, there is a definition, but there's also a reference to other violations under the criminal code. So showing sexually explicit material to, in certain particular contexts, could be an offense. You can see there are references to other criminal code violations. That's the answer to your question. It's not the same. It's apples and oranges. As I said earlier, the government is also concerned that there is a conflation of criminal law and regulations. If the purpose is to create a regulatory framework, then there needs to be a clear, positive objective to limit pornography to children, and then there can be a framework developed with the appropriate sanctions. But now, the way it's written, it's unclear. It's unclear if Parliament wishes to. It's unclear whether Parliament wishes to create a criminal code violation or a regulatory framework. What clarification is needed, in your opinion? According to the government, if the intention of Parliament was to create a regulatory framework, there would need to be a positive requirement, positive duty. Then tools can arise that are used in a regulatory context, such as monetary penalties, administrative penalties, etc. And then there could be an appropriate development of a regulatory framework. But what has been proposed here is a violation, and yes, it's defensible from with certain arguments, but if you don't have a defense, the agency that is responsible for enforcing the act can obtain an order to access said information. If the bill reflects this, well, there could be a situation where certain services could be blocked. And these services would have a lot of these contents. Yes, they would have pornography, but other contents as well. And is blocking those sites an appropriate and proportional response? This would go against a right to information and right for all Canadians to access content online. I'm sorry. The blocking agreement does not seem to be a proportional response to the framework that is being proposed. Thank you, Ms. Michaud.
Mr. McGregor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The testimony today has been interesting. I think it's led the committee down a few different paths as we consider Bill S-210. I guess what I wanted to know from you, Mr. Ripley, I think we've heard a lot about like the potential pitfalls with the term sexually explicit material as referenced in the criminal code, and the how it could be overly broad. But I'm wondering though, if we go down further in the bill to like still on page 3, section 6.2, where it says that no organization shall be convicted of an offense under section 5 if the act is alleged to constitute if the act alleged to constitute the offense has a legitimate purpose related to science, medicine, education, or the arts. So that legitimate purpose phrase there, does that not, like from the department's standpoint, wouldn't that sort of save streaming companies like Netflix, since they would be under the arts category? Like, how do you interpret that section? Does that add further clarity to the concerns you raised about the definition of sexually explicit material?
Thank you for the question. And so my understanding is, this type of exception is also drawn from the criminal code context in a situation where, again, you want to make sure that someone is not having a criminal prosecution for engaging in one of these activities. The government isn't clear that how this would necessarily be interpreted. And so, in a context where, again, from the government's read of the bill, it would apply to a very wide range of internet services, from search engines to internet service providers to social media to websites. You are creating a good deal of business uncertainty just saying that, Netflix and Disney Plus are going to have to make the case that it's the arts.
Is that because the term legitimate purpose is open to interpretation? Is that the problematic element there?
So I think that the challenge to me would actually be, communicating that, for example, entertainment content on those streaming services falls under the arts, for example. So it would be incumbent on them to show it. And I would also, just highlight, on the previous exchange, there is no defense about believing the person accessing the content was 18 or over, right? The way the bill is structured is it is a fence to make this kind of content available, right? And then the defense is, have you deployed one of the prescribed age verification technologies set out in regulation, right? So, again, it is a very binary framework that is being set up, and the entity that is going to be charged to administer it has very few enforcement mechanisms available to deal with the kind of nuances that you are bringing up.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. So thank you to all of our witnesses for being here tonight, and thank you for bearing with us until this late hour. And thank you all to our analysts and interpreters as well, and to all of our staff. So with that, I believe we have a consensus that it's time to adjourn. So we are adjourned.